All right, guys. Let's just see if everything's set up correctly. All right. Now let me know if you can hear me well and if you can see my screen. So we'll just spend this time, talking, and we'll wait for people to join until 7 p.m. So let's just see. I'll just pause this here. That's the point. All right. Perfect. Yeah, okay, perfect. All right. So I see a lot of you joining Discord right now. So we'll be using Discord somewhat to, maybe post questions, have some polls. And if you have some questions within the, stream, you can just, post them here in the workshop discussion channel here. So authentication authorization is a channel here. You can post it there. So this is the channel we want to use for that primarily. Cool. So how many of you are first timers? Like, did you attend the first workshop, or is this your first one? Let me know in the Discord channels. Maybe if it's your first one, just maybe introduce yourself here in the welcome and introduce channel, so people get to know you, where you're from, what you do, all of that here. It just maybe a very short introduction. As you may know, this is the second iteration of the workshop. So we did have that section here. So if you want, you can check out this channel here. It has all the discussion that we had from the previous workshop. So a lot of good submissions as well from there. So we'll just wait for, say, 5-6 more minutes. And if you have any questions, you can just use any of these channels here. You can maybe post this. Yeah. So maybe don't use this channel here. Maybe you can use the welcome introduction to introduce yourself. And or the random channel. This is the fun channel you can use to post any of the work you want to do here. We will really mostly reserve this channel for any of the workshop content. So for example, if we post some questions on polls on in workshop, if you have some doubts regarding any of the concepts taught in the workshop, you can use this one here. So basically that. And apart from that, yeah, it's mostly that one. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, so I see some of you, it's the first workshop that you're attending here. Perfect. So you can check out the other workshop as well. It's on my YouTube channel, so you can check that out as well. So in some cases, it worked as sorry about the noise. It's just the hostel staff. Yeah, sure. I'll try to make it a bit slow, for sure. Yeah. So what I was saying is the previous stream is on my YouTube channel, so you can check that out as well. So it was about how you can design a simple web app. So be sure to check it out. And this is in a kind of a way developing over that idea. So you now have a simple web application, and now you're trying to add authentication authorization on top of that. But don't worry if you don't have a simple web app already. So even if it's your first workshop, so you don't have to worry that much. You'll be able to, don't have to worry about it. You'll have to, there's no extra steps you need. It's all very basic. So you'll be covering everything from right from the scratch, and you'll be able to develop application all by yourself and add application authorization, everything. So it won't be a problem at all. Perfect. All right. So let me check out the introduction channel. I see some of you are typing here. It's always fun to have some people coming in. Great. All right, we're almost there. 5 more minutes, and then we'll start. If you have, meanwhile, if you have any questions or if you have any problem with how I am speaking, or do you want me to adjust in some way, do let me know. We do have the time right now. Perfect. Welcome, Shagun. So I'll be using Notion to teach the content here. Anyways. Welcome, Faizan. All right. I see quite a few online as well. That's great. Perfect. This is React versus Flutter debate. This is something which is, again, depending on like what exactly you're comfortable with. So if you are comfortable with Java or Dart language, go ahead with Flutter. So usually doesn't matter much what stack you choose, right? So it doesn't matter that much. So you have jobs in both the fields. So just find whatever you like and start building something great. So once you have a good product, it doesn't really matter what stack you're using. On time, yeah, we'll be waiting till 7 p.m. and then we'll start directly, so that nobody misses out on any of the content. Hi, Sushil. So this is the kind of this is the page I'll be using to teach the concepts. I'll be sharing that after the stream, so you'll have access to all of these pages. So don't worry about taking notes or any of that stuff. Just listen to the stream, perform the activities, participate on the Discord channels, and that will be it. So you don't need any extra steps or note taking, all of that. So you can keep that aside. All right, 2 minutes to go. Very excited. Which language? So yeah, you can use any language you want. So we won't be doing live coding on the stream. So I won't be using a single language to build an application. But the reference that you're going to use in the Crio Projects Hub, that will be on a specific language, but you're not required to use that language. You can obviously check out any language you want there, right? So that is not a problem. You will cover only security applications. Yeah, so we'll be covering how you can add authentication authorization on any kind of an application. So first we'll discuss theoretically what exactly that is, because authorization in itself is a very huge topic. So even for me, whenever I'm building any authorization or authentication into some application, it usually is very confusing because there are so many options. You can choose from a variety of different workflows. So how exactly do you navigate through that scenario? So that is what we'll cover in this entire workshop. If you want to check out how to build a web application, a very simple web application, what REST server is, you can check out the previous stream. So like this is mostly focusing on the security part. Yeah. Are you going to walk through how data is secured in the network? No, not exactly. We won't be going to details of how the network security is managed. We will just be looking at what are some of the common standards that you use, because of course to cover that it will take a lot of time. So we'll just be covering what are the standards that we use in security. So OAuth, OpenID Connect, all of these you might have heard already, these terms. So we'll be understanding how exactly those work and like how you can use them in your own applications. Maybe how do you add Google sign in, Facebook sign in. So all of that you see in multiple applications, right? So you can log in with some other social account. So how does that happen? So we'll be covering somewhat all of that, mostly in that. That is the idea. All right, it's 7 p.m. So let's just start with the education. So first of all, welcome everybody to this live stream. Last time we had a lot of fun discussing how to build a simple web application. And we also had a lot of good submissions coming in at the end of the workshop. So usually how it goes is this. I perform this workshop for an hour or so. I just teach you some very important concepts regarding any of the topic at hand. And then you take the entire weekend, the Saturday and Sunday, and then you build some application on your own. So you have the entire support of the Discord community. You have other people there. You have me on the channel. So you can leverage this entire weekend to build some amazing project of your own. You also have the Crio Projects Hub to use as a reference, right? So you can also take that help as well. So essentially, you have to build an application and submit as a GitHub pull request. right? So when that comes in, I evaluate all those problems, and at the end, we distribute prizes to the top projects, right? So that is the idea behind it. So all right, enough with the introduction and stuff. Now let's jump into what we're going to cover in this particular workshop. All right. So authentication authorization is simple web app. So as well. And then we'll dive deeper into OAuth. So I'll pick OAuth and then we'll explore it even deeper. We'll see what are the different flows you can use. And by flows, I mean what are different ways in which you can use OAuth. Right. So in your application, depending on what application you have multiple OAuth flows that you can use. So we'll be discussing that as well. And at the end, we'll also look at a JWT. So you may have heard of a JSON Web Token. So we'll know what JSON Web Token is, where it fits in all of that. So we have a lot to cover, as you see, and there are a lot of interesting use cases. And plus, this is something which is really important. So every time you're building an application and you have to take it to production, right? If you have to make it bigger, you always have to add that extra step, the authentication authorization step, because you don't want everybody to access your app, right? You have to add some layer of security. Right? So this is the idea behind the workshop. These are things that we're going to cover in it, and we'll be following Crio Projects Hub at the end. So once you're done with this entire live stream, we'll be heading over to Crio's Project Hub, and then we'll pick a project. I'll show you which project to pick, and then you can get started with that. All right. So let me just check if there are any questions so far. Nope. Yeah, the session would be around like 2 hours maybe. Okay. So why does it say disconnected? I'm not sure. Can you guys hear me now? Yep. I think it's connected again. I think I missed you guys for a second. So it's no problem. So I hope I covered this introduction part, right? So all of that is perfect. And yeah. So did you guys see the introduction part, or did I miss it? Right. I think we had some kind of a drop connection. Right. So let me know if that part of this is okay. Perfect. Now let's just head to the contents here. So I'll start with some small introduction about myself. All right. So that is about me. A very short introduction. So I'm a final year undergraduate at IIT Bhubaneswar. So I'm pursuing a major in electronics and communication engineering, but I have a lot of interest in, of course, in computer science. I'm currently as a student MLOps engineer at ZenML.io. So it's a startup based out of Germany, and we are kind of building an MLOps framework. So that is who I am currently. I'm also a Master Learn Student Ambassador. So this is one of the really popular and really cool student communities. So if you are a student and you want to learn along with your peers some new technologies as well, so you should easily check out Master Learn Student Ambassador. It's a really fantastic program. I also love open source and I blog about it. I'm a tech speaker. I speak at different conferences about what I do and what I write. And plus, I'm a YouTuber, of course. So that's a very short introduction. Let's just head right into the content. Right. So to begin off, like, why do you need security in your apps? It's a very simple idea to think of. So basically, say for example, you have some kind of a company, you're building some application which has a lot of investment from your side. So maybe you have invested a lot of resources to develop and build that product, right? So you want to commodify that thing, right? You want to give access to only those people who maybe pay for it, or some kind of a gate limiting, right? So that is one of the very common use cases in which you may have to add some kind of a security layer on top of any of your applications, right? Plus you have to protect your application from any kind of attacks, correct? So maybe you have to rate limit by IP and other ways in which you have to stop people from misusing your resources, because of course any resource you host online costs you money, right? So if you have a website which is up, or if you have some database which you're exposing through the web application, so all of that will be costing you money as well. So you have to find some way to restrict and control who can access your application. So the obvious solution to that is to use, say, authentication authorization, right? So that is the idea behind why you need to secure applications. And even if you join startups or if you're building your own product, this is something which you need to take care of, right? Because you have to introduce, say, different tiers of your service, like who is paying in what tier and should get access to what resources. So this is a very crucial thing to get your application to production, right? So that is why I need to understand that this is something which is super important and that you need to understand very well. All right, so now it comes to authentication. Now we have heard of authentication authorization a lot, right? So we have this idea that these concepts allow us to, restrict users or maybe protect your services. But how exactly do this work? Like, what exactly is authentication? Right. So authentication, as this definition says, is the act of validating that users are who they claim to be. So basically, you can think of it in very simple terms: is that through authentication you prove your identity. So you say that, okay, maybe I am Jayesh, so I need to prove that I am Jayesh somehow, right? So that is this process is called authentication, right? So this is something very common. So you may have like there are multiple ways in which you can prove that. So maybe let's just say you have a username and a password, right? So for every service you identify yourself as the true owner by providing the username and password that you have registered already, right? So for say for any banking applications or Twitter, Instagram, everywhere what you do is you supply your username and your password, and so the application or the Instagram, whatever, it knows that it's indeed you who's accessing the service, right? So any of these ways in which you do the authentication is called a factor. It's called an authentication factor, right? So the most common factor which you may have heard of is, of course, the username and password. So that is one of the most common ways in which people try to prove their identity, right? So authentication is basically that, proving who you are, right? And now coming to some other factors, you may also imagine that it's not always your username and password that you're using, right? You may also use your biometric fingerprint, right? Or maybe your iris scan. And you may see in some movies, whenever they open the bank safe, they also use their iris scan as well. So these are some other factors in which they prove who exactly you are, right? Now this gives an idea of multi-factor authentication. So this is something you may have heard of before. So MFA is multi-factor authentication, and here factor refers to a way in which you can authenticate yourself. So multi-factor means you're not using a single factor to authenticate, you're using multiple factors. So instead of using just say a password, you also add another layer on top of that. So in this infographic, you can see you need to supply one password and some other means, like some other factor. This can be say a fingerprint, or let's just say a phone number, and anything else, right? So that is the idea. So you have to perform a multi-factor step in order to get access to whatever resource you want to. Right? This is the idea behind it. It's usually recommended practice in a lot of cases because you actually have, maybe if your password gets leaked, you still have this as your identifying factor. All right, so I have linked these two things here. So maybe once the workshop is over, you can check it out in detail, like why it is required, what are the details about it. But for now, let's just keep this in mind. It will be enough for this now context. Now you have a good understanding of authentication. Please know that, okay, this is in the form of multiple ways. So either it can use a simple username password format, or it can use say a fingerprint or iris scan, all of that. So all of these factors are ways in which the user identifies that, okay, user clarifies that, okay, this is me who is accessing the service, right? So this is the idea behind authentication. All right, so once authentication is done, then we can go through authorization. All right, so in this case, let me just see, just give me a sec. All right, I'll have to think of, yep, I think it's back. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Cool. So coming to authorization, first I'll see if there are any questions here, right? So let's just see. Right. Yeah, so is it still stuck? So let me see. Let me check if the stream is still stuck. I think it's now live again. Let me know if you missed any of the part, and we'll be easily doing it again. Still stuck. Okay. Now good. It's good now. Perfect. Thank you. I'm sorry about that. Usually the Wi-Fi does have some problem in it. Okay, thank you guys, and let me know if I missed any of the part here. So is authentication clear? Yeah, I think the stream should be back up now. So let me know if you can hear me again, and then we can resume with that. I'm sorry about the problem here. Like, I'm not really sure why this happens. Like, sometimes the Wi-Fi just gives up on me, and so we get this initial, like even last time there was some kind of trouble. So let me know, yeah, if it's back. Okay, perfect. So I'll just maybe keep the video off, my video off for now, so that we can consume less bandwidth that way, and we can easily resume there. Perfect. Thank you guys for sticking around. Sorry about any of the trouble happened. So let's just recap on what we've done before, right? So authentication was covered. We looked at what factor means and what multi-factor authentication is. So basically we have covered just very simple in simple terms what authentication is. Now let's just quickly go over to authorization. All right. So what is authorization? So authentication was about proving your identity to the person, to any of the service, right? So you have to supply some kind of a credentials, say maybe password and ID, and then you make the service believe that it is you who is accessing the service. So what exactly is authorization? So authorization is the process in which you give someone or something the ability to access a resource. Now, I understand that these two things sound very similar, right? So you are in authorization, you're actually giving somebody the ability to access a resource, and in authentication, you're proving the identity. So it does sound a lot similar, but there are very slight differences here. So in the case of authorization, you don't have to actually know who the person is who's accessing the service, right? So how is that achieved? That is achieved by using some kind of codes. So it's like a pass, right? So anybody with the pass is able to access the resource, right? So it could be anybody, right? You don't know who's actually using the pass to access the resource. It's just like concert tickets, right? So if you buy a concert ticket, this ticket may or may not carry your name on it, right? So it can be just an anonymous ticket without your name, correct? So but that still allows you to go and visit say one of these games, right? So that is the idea behind it. So authorization doesn't deal with the identity of a person, it just gives you access to some kind of a resource, correct? So that is who the authorization is. So if you look at this typical flow here, it's somewhat of the same thing. You just request access from some owner, right? So this can be the ticket person who supplies the tickets. He gives you some kind of a code, and now what you can do is you can use this code to access whatever resource you want. So this is kind of a typical flow of authorization. So here in nowhere does identity of a person come in. Alright, so this code can be accessed by anybody to access the resource. So for example, even if this user had requested this code, anybody else who gets possession of this code will also be able to use the resource. All right, so this is the idea behind authorization. So it is somewhat different from authentication. So let me know if you have any discussion about any yeah. So do you have any questions and any doubts about how different authorization is from authentication? So I've just covered at the very high level the how authorization is somewhat different. So authorization doesn't deal with the identity of a person. It only deals with giving access of any particular resource to any user, right? That is the idea behind authorization. Now, if you imagine, this is something which is really common, because in a lot of cases, in any of the applications you use, authorization plays a very vital role, right? So for example, if you imagine, if you have say a Twitter application or some many other applications, and you want some other app to use your information from there. For example, whenever you sign in using a Google account, you do actually authorize that application to use your Google data, right? So that is the idea. Your authorization is very important in that scenario. So let's just look at OAuth for now. Right, so I'll just go back here to see if anybody has any questions. Is it like Google asking me authentication to login and I'm giving authorization to save my mail and ID password? Yeah, it is somewhat same. Like if Google asks you to log in that case, you're actually providing your username and password to Google. So that means authentication, right? So yes, I'll repeat the authentication again. So basically authentication is about proving your identity to any of the service, right? So for example, let's just take an example of Google sign in. So whenever you go to Google sign in, you have these two fields, right? Username and password, right? So you supply that password and username because you are the only person who knows that fields, right? So Google knows that whenever these combination of username and password comes in that case, Google knows that, okay, this is indeed you who is accessing the service. So you're proving your identity to Google, right? That is the idea behind authentication. Authorization, on the other hand, would mean that you are giving some service permission to use your data or use any other service. For example, let's just say you're logging into Discord using Google, or you're logging into some other third-party application using a Google account, right? So in that case, you are authorizing that application, the third-party application, to use your Google account, right? So that is authorization. And so we'll cover all of that later as well. But just as a very slight difference between these two things is this thing. Yeah, we'll doing the practical later, of course. For now, let's just worry about the technical details and also cover some examples. We'll look at some flows and also cover the practical part later as well. Right. So yeah. Could you share Notion links? Yeah, of course. I'll be sharing this entire notebook, all the resources here later on after the stream. So don't worry about taking notes, any of that stuff. Just pay attention to the stream, ask questions. Like we'll get through this together. No problems there, right? All right. How web apps are different from website? Yeah, web apps are not like we'll come to that. Like once we're done with the flows, like once you look at the diagrams, you'll have a lot of clarity in what website is, what is a web app, right? So all of that will be covered once you look at the diagrams which I'll show you, right? So there is a problem in that. All right, so I think we have covered that for now. Let's just get back to OAuth right now, right? So for OAuth, like I want to say, like it is not any kind of product or service, right? So first of all, why OAuth, right? So why are we studying OAuth, right? So for example, you already know what authorization is, correct? So authorization is a way of which you grant access to some service to use your data, correct? So earlier, what used to happen is, say you have some website who wants to use your data, you have to supply your username and password to that website. Let's take an example. You have an Instagram account, correct? And you want Instagram to post all of your photos to Facebook as well. Let's just say to Facebook and to Twitter, right? So in the earlier days, what used to happen is, for Instagram to be able to use your Facebook account, or for Instagram to be able to use a Twitter account, you had to supply your Twitter username and Twitter password to Instagram application, right? And then just trust that the Instagram application will only post photos and not do anything else, right? So this is not a very, very good model, of course, right? Because once you give your username and password to any service, the service can basically do anything it wants, right? So not just post photos, it can, maybe send messages to people and whatnot, right? So this is the idea. So this is not a very healthy way in which you do it. So, right, so we still have this problem. So if we have two different services, how do you ensure that the second service can access and use some very particular resource from the first service, right? So the second service here could be Instagram. The first service could be, say, Twitter. So how do you ensure that Instagram only uses the post feature to post some kind of photo to your Twitter feed and not do anything else, right? So how do you authorize Instagram to access your Twitter account, right? So this is the problem that a lot of programmers faced in the early times. That is when OAuth came into picture, right? So this is a very beautiful illustration from one of the websites I've put up. So this is from Okta.com. Now it just sends the message very clearly, right? So for example, if you had in the older times, if you had some kind of website like this, they would just ask you for your username and password of your bank, and they would promise that they will take only that much amount of money that they want, right? So of course you can't trust such a system, because they may pull any amount of money as they want if you give them a username and password, correct? So that is something which is not a very reliable way of authorization currently, correct? So in that scenario, we had the entrance of OAuth, right? So let me just get back to see if people can actually understand this for now. Authorization means you get privilege to access certain services. Correct. Yeah, correct. So authorization would mean that you have given some kind of an access for any of the say access can be given to any service to access some other kind of resources, right? So that is the idea behind it. So JWT is type of authorization. So I will get to JWT later. So what JWT is, we'll exactly cover all of that later on. Correct. Will you give study material? Yes, you'll have access to the Notion and all the resources. I'm not able to understand authorization. All right, so no issues there. So I'll cover that again. So basically, let's just take an example, a very basic example of, say, Instagram and Facebook again. All right. So what you essentially mean is this. Let's just say I have some applications, or maybe you can take this example here, Tinder and Spotify, right? So if you have Tinder account, you get the option to add your Spotify playlist to that profile, right? So how does this happen? Now, Tinder in itself is one application. Spotify is another application. These two are independent, different applications, correct? So you have one account in Tinder, you have one account in Spotify, right? So these are not connected at this particular point. So how do you allow Tinder to access your data from Spotify, right? So for example, all of these playlists here are part of your account in Spotify, right? So how does Twitter get access to this? So there must be some way in which you're allowing Tinder to access your resources from Spotify, right? So that is, in other words, you're authorizing Tinder to get data from your Spotify account, right? So this is what authorization basically means. So is it clear now? Yeah, okay. So Bhaskar, let me know if you understand authorization now, right? So which programming language? Again, the programming language is agnostic. We can use any language of your choice. Don't have to worry about that. Please explain OAuth again. Okay, for sure, no issues. So basically, what this means here is you do understand the authorization case, right? So you have two services who need to talk to each other, right? Who need to share information between each other, right? So you have this use case. Now, how do you implement this? So for example, let's just say if Tinder wanted data from Spotify, one way of doing it would be that you provide your Spotify credentials, like you provide your Spotify username and password to Tinder, right? And then Tinder would log in on your behalf, get the data it wants, right? And then maybe log out, right? So that could have been one way of doing it. But what is the downside in that scenario is that once you have given your ID and password, your Spotify ID and password to Tinder, you are not sure what Tinder can do, right? Because once you have those credentials, you can basically access everything. So maybe you can add new playlists, create new playlists, delete entire songs, right? So once you have given your credentials, you basically lost control over what the other service can do. So this is not a very reliable way of doing things, right? So you need some kind of a framework in which, through which you can give only very narrow access to some applications. So this is the problem that we had, right? So we haven't discussed what exactly OAuth is right now, but I'm just making the case for why OAuth is important, why OAuth is necessary, right? So that is the case which I'm making right now. All right. So this is where OAuth came into the picture, right? We'll be discussing OAuth right now. We haven't covered that. I was just explaining what the problem was and why OAuth came into the picture. Right. So yeah, do you mean to say the multiple authorization of same user? Do you mean to say there could be multiple authorization of same user for different resources? Yeah, I think, yeah, of course. If for different resources you mean different APIs or different apps, then of course, why not? Yeah. Isn't that what API is for? Correct. So API allows two applications to talk to each other, but in order for them to talk to each other, you need to have some kind of agreement, right? So let's just say if I want some data from you, so API is the way I'll ask data from you, right? For example, Gautam has some data and I have some data, so I need to access Gautam's data. So Gautam will give me some kind of an API. So it will give me some kind of say code using which I can request access from Gautam. But am I actually allowed to do it, right? So will you share your data with me or not, right? So that is only if you have authorized me already. So only once Gautam authorizes me to be able to access his data, then I can use his API to get the data, right? So does that make sense? Because if you have exposed your API, anybody can get your data, right? So from X to Z, everybody can easily access data, but you have to restrict that. So you can't just send your data to everybody who asks for it, right? So that is the idea. So authorization is when you have to restrict access to your API. That is the idea behind it. OAuth is just like API. No, it is different. Is it still confusing, OAuth and APIs? So API is a way in which you get data from something, but if you're actually allowed to get data is what matters, right? So if you look at, say, let's just say any weather API or any kind of API, public API which you use. So they usually ask you for, say, a private key, right? So whenever you make requests to any of the APIs, they ask you to supply some kind of a key. So this key in a way is proving that, okay, I am Jaish and I have access to this account, I have paid for it, and then I'm trying to access this API, right? So if you don't supply that key to the API request, you won't get the data you want. Okay, so that is the idea behind it. API is just a means to get the data, but authentication is proving that, okay, you are indeed allowed to get the data for it. Then how cookies are different? Cookies are not different. Cookies are actually ways. Cookies are used to provide authentication. For example, we'll get to that later on. Like in the later discussion, I'll tell you, like, cookies is not different. Cookies is just like something which is stored in a browser and gets sent on every request, right? You can implement authorization using cookies. That is the idea, right? For example, if you have access, for example, let's just take example of a game again. So there's a cricket game. You have purchased tickets to the game. So anybody which holds that ticket can go and watch that game. So the ticket here is kind of a token or a pass which authorizes you to go into and watch the match, correct? But how do you carry this token up to the game, right? So you're at your home right now, correct? You're at your home, you got your say ticket at your hand. So you have to find some way in which you transport this, maybe, right? So cookies can be one way of doing that. For example, if you get access to some token and you want to send it through the request to some resource, some backend resource, you can easily use cookies, session cookies for that, right? So that is one of the ways in which you can implement that. It's not exactly different. It all works together that way. Does that mean OAuth provides secure key for API to community? Yeah, in a way, correct. So OAuth ultimately provides tokens. So OAuth in the end gives you tokens in which you can communicate later on. So we'll get to that. Don't worry about it. So yeah, for now, let's just get back to the documentation here. So yeah, OAuth isn't a service, as I told, is not any public API you use. So OAuth is not a product, right? So it is not that some company made this product for you to use it. It's just a standard. It's an open standard that anybody can implement, right? So it just has some guidelines. You can visit the RFC for it. So it is just provides some guidelines that, okay, this is how the flows should be. This is the procedure you should follow, and anybody can implement that, right? So OAuth is just a standard that you implement. And if you use a lot of public tools, like if you check out some libraries from OAuth, all of those are automatically implemented for you, so you don't have to write the code yourself. If it doesn't make a lot of sense right now, don't worry. Like we'll be covering examples later on as well, right? So OAuth isn't a service; it's just an open standard. It just defines some rules in which you can easily implement authorization, right? So because just imagine the earlier flow which we talked about, right? The flow here. And so this is also one of the ways in which you can authorize people, right? You can just have the user ask for the code, get the code, and use the resource. This is one way of doing it. Like, but is this way the best? Is this really secure? Like, what else should I do, right? So all of that data is part of OAuth. Like, OAuth defines what flows are secure, what flows to use in what scenarios, right? So all of that is covered inside OAuth. Right? We'll be looking at all of those as well. So for now, let's just take some examples of OAuth in action, right? So first of all of you have Discord right now, so we'll do a very short activity here. So I want you to link, say, your Twitter account or your GitHub account to your Discord app, right? So in this case, you're basically using two different services to talk to each other, right? So you're allowing Discord, you're authorizing Discord to get information from these services. For example, if you connect your Discord to GitHub, you're allowing Discord to get some information out of your GitHub account, right? So let's just out. I'll do it together with on the screen, but you are also allowed to connect your own applications to Discord, and let us know in Discord channels. Like I just mentioned this particular channel here. So this is the workshop channel which you have. So let me know how you went through the entire process, right? What is the one thing which you observed, and does this correspond to what we have discussed on the Notion so far, right? So let me just connect, say, some random application to my channel here. So let me click on the settings here, right? So I go into the settings. So you can follow along here, or you can maybe do it on your own as well. So don't worry about that. Right? So in that case, let's just say we also have a lot of connections here. Authorized applications, yeah, there you go. So you go into authorized apps tab. Okay, maybe I have to disable that. Yeah. There you go. Yep. So there you go. Authorized apps. Yeah. So in authorized apps, you can see a list of all the apps that I've already authorized. So these apps have access to my Discord data, right? So this Groovy is a music bot, which is very popular. So I have authorized Groovy to access my username, avatar, banner. So all of these details are part of my Discord application, right? So the username is part of Discord, all of that. But Groovy as an application is authorized to access all of these things. I can also deauthorize Groovy at any point of time. So when I deauthorize, Groovy will no longer be able to access any of those resources here. Right? That is the idea behind using this thing. But now we can easily add some connections. Let's just say I want to add some account here. So maybe I'll say I want to add GitHub to my Discord application, right? So what I'll do is I'll just click on GitHub here. Right? So I'll just click on GitHub. And let's just see what the entire flow looks like when you're doing it. Right? So I've clicked on GitHub. Now it will just see if I'm already logged into GitHub. So if I'm logged into GitHub, it will just maybe ask me permission for linking my GitHub account to Discord, right? So it has already connected my GitHub account to Discord, right? So this is how it is. Now if I go into my GitHub application, so let me just go into my GitHub account right now, right? So let me go into GitHub account. So here, when I explore my settings, or when I see what different apps are able to use my my GitHub application, I'll be able to see that here. Let me see. These are the application tab. So if you go into the application tab, you can see authorized GitHub apps, right? I'll have to provide my password here. So you have to provide your password. See, this is one application which is using GitHub thing. Other authorized OAuth applications, these are the different OAuth applications which are using. So you can see Discord here, right? So I have allowed Discord as an application to use my Twitter data. This is the idea behind it, right? I think we are receiving messages, I guess. Whatever, yeah. This is the idea. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, so you can easily check this out. Open your Discord, connect any of your social apps with Discord and see what the flow looks like. And then open that particular account and see how you have access to that. For example, if you want to revoke access, you can easily revoke access here as well. Correct? So this is the idea behind it. So you're basically enabling two different services to communicate with each other. That is the idea behind OAuth. Right? So this is the idea behind it. Let me know if I've done it, and yeah. Let me know if your GitHub also reflects this change here. So any application that you use with GitHub is usually reflected here. So whenever you say there's a screen which you see which says, do you want to allow Discord to use your GitHub data, then you say be yes or allow. In that case, that application gets added to that list here, and this is the idea. Okay. Let me see. OAuth gets you authorized for getting APIs. Yeah, true. That is the idea. Got it. If someone stores that ticket, that user or app can get access to resource, right? Perfect. Yeah, that is the idea. So, for example, if you have somehow gotten access to any of the ticket or token, we usually call it token in authorization jargon. So, if you have access to that token, then you can easily access any of the resource, even if it was not requested by you, right? So that is very sensitive information. So when you get access to token, you have to keep it secure. You don't have to say it's the same thing as an API key, right? So whenever you're using an API key of some service like a weather API, you have to keep the API key secure, because anybody who has that key can access an API and can use your credits for themselves, right? That is the idea. What is REST API? REST API is something which we'll cover later. Like we already have covered that in the last live stream, but don't worry about that. As a starter, it's just a very common standard. So it is how you create servers and how you communicate between servers and client. That is the idea behind it. All right. Okay. So in that case of authorization, Tinder can access only few data or all data. Exactly. So what our idea is, we want Tinder to be able to access only certain parts of my Spotify application, right? So I want, so whenever you see the consent page, do you remember the consent page where it says, do you want to allow such and such application to access these many permissions, right? So you get a list of permissions there, and then you click on allow, right? So the other application only gets access to those specific permissions. You don't have other permissions that can be accessed, right? That is the idea behind it. Otherwise, in older times, if you had to supply your username and password, then basically the third party application has entire control over your application. It can do basically whatever it wants from it, right? So that is not desirable in that scene. Yeah. If I'm using JavaScript as a backend, if someone stopped JavaScript on the website, then they can access it. Exactly. Yeah. True. So we don't have to. So in that case, we have to be certain about not storing tokens in JavaScript. This is something which we'll cover later on. So it's a good point that you've covered it now, but we'll cover it later on. Don't worry about it. All right. Authorization can access data from API or not. I don't understand this question that well. Can other users look at my GitHub account if I connect it? Yeah, of course. So only those details which you have shared with Discord will be available for the users to look at. For example, if you allow, say, Discord to access your GitHub account, then it tells you what different permissions there are right now with it, right? So if you click on Discord app here, it will show that, okay, this is the permission that Discord has currently. It can read all user profile data. So nothing other than that, right? It can't write to my repositories. It can't pull, push. None of that can be accessed by Discord bot. It can only read the profile data, right? So I've only allowed Discord bot to do this particular. So this is like fine graining access to your account. You don't allow access to everything from a GitHub account, but only very specific permissions here. So anybody who opens Discord and maybe opens your profile there could see your user profile data, like maybe your name, your tag, all of that can be easily seen by anybody who looks at your Discord account. And that is the idea behind it. All right. OAuth helping protecting the privacy and data between both relation. Correct. Yeah, that is the idea behind OAuth. Correct. So OAuth enables you to have such a flow. That is basically it. Right. So this entire flow is the OAuth flow, like where you ask for permission for specific permissions and then you allow the particular application to use that. Right. So this is something we already looked at, the authorized apps list. Right. So this is these are the apps which you have authorized to use your Discord data. Correct. Right, so currently Spotify Tinder account, we already discussed this idea a lot. So this is done. But now how does it work under the hood, right? So now we have a good idea of what OAuth actually does or why it is required, but we have never seen it in action, right? So how does it exactly work? Like what are the different flows? How does the token gets exchanged? Token or the ticket? How does it get exchanged? Where is it stored? Like how do you request access to it? So all of that will be covered now. Correct? So let's just look at terminology first. Because whenever you're starting to learn new technology, the most important thing to know first is all the words and all the terminology. Because sometimes you might get stuck and you might not exactly know what the meaning of it is, and it might get overwhelming at that point, right? So first of all, we look at a very common use case. Like we'll look at, say, Google Docs, because it is something which everybody has already used before, right? So maybe you do your assignments together, or maybe share some ideas. So all of those things are going to be easily done by using Google Docs, right? So what is the flow? Like I want you to imagine, I want you to remember and recall what exactly is the flow when you're sharing a document on Google, right? Google Docs. So that is the idea. So using this particular example, we'll be understanding some very common terms, some very common words that are usually used in the OAuth scene, right? Okay, I want to look at this example here, right? So here I am sharing some document using the share option, right? So in this case, what you get is you see that this is the owner. It shows this is the owner of the document, which is me, and I'm sharing it with people in groups, and I can easily get a link here, right? So what the first thing I want you to know is the owner, right? So every time you're using some kind of an OAuth flow, there has to be one owner, like which is the owner of the resource, like whatever you're trying to expose. Like I'm trying to share my document. So document here is the resource which I want to share, and I want to share it with people, right? So how do I do it? I create a link for that. Now this link is kind of a token, correct? So this link is the ticket or token. If anybody gets access to this link, they can easily view my document, right? This is the setting which I've done here. So anyone with the link on the internet can view this document, right? So this link in some ways called a token. So what we have discussed so far as a ticket is also called a token. It is primarily called as token in OAuth. So from now on, every time I say a token, you must think of it in a way, you must think of it as a ticket or as the pass using which you can access any resource, right? So this link in this example is a token here, right? And now this is the part where you specify what kind of permissions you're allowing this person with the link to have, right? So anybody with this link can maybe view or comment or edit, right? So these are the permissions which you control. So similar to what we saw here, so you can see Discord can read all of the user data, right? So this is something much similar here. So when you are sharing your document, you can easily specify what permissions you want to share with anybody, right? So this is the idea behind it. So three important terms to know from here are permissions. So this is the permissions which you specify, the resource, which is the thing which you want to share with people, the resource owner, the person who owns the resource and provides you the tokens and stuff. Like usually it is the same person who owns and provides the token, but in some cases it might be different as well. Maybe I might own the token, but I may outsource the release of tokens to some other authority, right? Maybe I can maybe have some other kind of some other person to issue tokens on my behalf, right? So that also something is possible. Right, so this is the idea. So you have to know about an owner. You have to know about say permissions, like what permissions are. You have to know what token is. Right. So this is the very basic OAuth terminology. Now we're covering more as we go forward. But yeah, this is basically it. So this is the terminology part. So I think we have no more questions at this stage here. Okay, I think we have. Yeah. Uh, API down means what and how? I'm not sure what API down means here. Not my complete GitHub work. No, not exactly. So you, as I pointed out, you can only you see what access you give to Discord, right? So it can only read profile data here, right? So the Discord developers who wrote this bot, they only requested for this permission from your GitHub account, and it is already defined here. Okay. I will move fast. Yeah, there are a lot of questions here. So Discord is getting an access to your GitHub profile. Does OAuth play any role in this? Like, does any API in between? I'm not sure what this means. Yeah, OAuth does play a role in this. Yeah, correct. OAuth does play a role in this. Authorization key remains constant all the time because how the app can access information every time of the day. Also, what exactly happens when you authorize it? Yeah. So this authorization key usually there is some way to refresh this. So we'll cover that later. So you have a token and you refresh this token periodically. So it does expire. It does expire really fast. But every time you get a refresh token, and then you can easily get a new token from that. So we'll cover that later on. Don't worry about it. And how exactly happens when we deauthorize it? So when you deauthorize it, the server no longer accepts that token as valid, right? So you can think about the ticket is not valid anymore. That is what happens when deauthorizes, right? Am I still stuck? Let me know in the comments. Admin can give access to more persons in terminology. Yeah, of course. You can add as many people as you want. That is no problem, of course. You can authorize obviously more than one people because I'm sharing this notion to you guys, so everybody will be able to access it, and I'll add maybe some viewer permission to it, right? So it is basically the same idea here. All right, so yeah, let us go back and let's see what more we can do. So this is probably clear terminology. So this is a very three basic terms that we have to cover. Now let's move forward, right? So let's just now talk about the flows, right? So what are exactly OAuth flows? So flows, as I already mentioned, are just different ways in which you can perform authorization, right? So one way of doing it was just simply requesting token from an owner and then using that token to access the resource, right? But is it the best way? Is it the most secure way? That is something which we cover in the OAuth flows section, right? So I'll cover two different flows here. There are multiple other flows, but for now we'll only look at two different flows and we'll try to see what merit each of these flow has. Like when do you use a particular flow? What is this flow required and like how it is useful, right? So first of all, let's just cover the client credentials flow, right? So this is the diagram which I want to see. It is very similar to what we saw earlier, right? So you had the owner at this point, you had the user or client at this point, you had the resource here, right? So you basically do the same thing. You provide some kind of credentials to the authorization server, right? So you just say, I provide my client ID, client secret. We'll cover what these things mean later on. So you provide some kind of credentials to authentication server, and now authorization server knows that, okay, this is you who is accessing the service. It validates that these two values, and then it sends you an access token. So this access token is a token which allows you to access the resource. It is called an access token, right? So this access token can then be utilized by this client to get access to this resource, right? So this is the idea behind a client credential flow, correct? So in this case, what I want you to observe is that there is obviously no involvement of any end user, right? So here there is no prompt to sign in, or there is no end user anywhere, right? So I'm not going to the user to get some credentials or nothing. Like I'm just using client ID and client secret. Now what exactly is a client ID and client secret? So we'll cover that here, right? So anytime you're trying to access any protected resource, like for example, any authentication server you have here. So this is authorization server. Now this server has all the information about what different clients are allowed to access this particular resource, right? So this is the resource you want to share. Now this server needs to have knowledge of this resource and who's allowed to access it. So for that to happen, you need to register your client with this server. So that page somewhat looks like this. So this is an example from Microsoft Azure, right? So in this example, what I'm doing is I'm setting up my application here. So basically what I'm doing is I'm telling Microsoft Azure that, okay, I have to register one application, which is then allowed, which will then be allowed in the future to access any resource, right? So basically what you do is you register your client with the authorization server. And when you do register with the authorization server, you get a set of client ID and client secret as the output, right? So authorization server then acknowledges that, okay, I understand that, okay, you are a client and you want to access the resource, and this is the client ID, this is the client secret that you should use for any future requests, right? So in the future, if you want to access any of the values, you should always use this set of strings to access it. That is how it works. So initially you register your client with this authorization server. You specify the name, you specify redirect URI, and then you get the set of client ID and client secret, which you can then use to access it. Is this part clear? Is OTP one form of authorization? Yes, exactly. It is one form of authorization. So OTP is also a way in which you allow access to some kind of resource from your device, right? So that is also one of the flows, correct? Will recording be available? Yes, recording will be available later on. Same authorization. Client credential, Google sign in. Not exactly, because see, client credential does not involve the user at any point, right? So we'll be covering the user flow later on. But in this example, there was no way in which any user is involved. So this client was registered beforehand with the authorization server. All the client had to do was send its own client ID and secret, which was already static, right? So whenever you register any client with the authorization server, you do get this set of credentials, correct? So this flow is mostly used only for machine to machine communications. So you don't have any user anywhere, right? So only machines talk to each other. For example, if you have two different applications that want to talk to each other, and it does not need to have any interaction from any end user, in that case, you're going to use this flow, right? So this client registered with the authorization server easily provides the client ID, client secret, and gets the token back. So there is no need to sign in, there is no need to log in, no need to provide any user credentials here, right? This is the idea behind the client initial. It's not used that much because, of course, a lot of the cases when you build an application, you build a client-facing application, right? You build an application where the user has to sign in, right? So for that flow, this is not the right flow for that use case scenario, right? So this is just a very basic idea of how that flow is used. So now we'll actually come to the part which is really popular, which is the one which we most probably will use in the future as well. This is the authorization code flow, right? So now the browser comes into the picture, and now sign in, login, all of that will be covered in this particular flow, right? Okay. How can I make sure only specific apps should be allowed to use that token? If one app company sells my token to different company, it should not be allowed to use that token. I'm not sure if I understand what this means is, but yeah, of course. If any of the company, if any of the companies starts selling your token to other companies, then of course you should not be using that application again. But yeah, this is not standard practice. Of course, it is theoretically possible. Like if I am an application, if I get access to your token, I can obviously share it with everybody, but that is not how it works, right? Because this is not exactly how it should happen. Google asking for approval that someone is using Gmail is there authorization? Yeah, I think so. I think I know what you're asking. So yeah, every time you authorize any application to get some value, that's authorization. Okay, so now let's just cover the authorization code flow first of all, right? So let me just see if everything is going fine here. If it's okay, perfect. Let's see if you have any questions. No questions. Perfect. Okay, authorization code flow. This is the part which really matters. Like this is the flow which you're going to implement and which you see being executed in normal everyday life, right? So this is how the flow looks like. Now I'll go step by step to the entire part. Now here also I'll cover what the difference between a website and a web server, or sorry, web app and a website actually is. So here you see a browser. This is the website which you see. Here you see a web app. Now you can imagine that these two boxes, right? These two boxes are part of your application which you build, right? So what essentially this means is this: you have this server code running on a web app, right? So what this does is, say it can render, say some pages to your website. It is kind of the backend for your website, right? So this is you render whatever pages you want here to the browser using this web app. Right, so this is not exposed to the public. The code for this web app is not public, of course, but the website, of course, anything that you send to the website can easily be accessed by anybody, right? So you can just pause the website, you can look at all of the code that powers the website, right? But the web app which sits in the backend, that is something which public cannot access, so it is more secure, right? That is the idea. So this is a browser, this is a web app, this is your authorization server. Now, what an authorization server is, it can be any server, anything which has the authority to grant access. So this can be the resource owner as well. Like whoever owns the resource can also be an authorization server, or it can be some third party server as well, right? So this is the idea. So this is the authorization server here. This is the web app. This is your browser at which you render all of your data, and this is the resource which you're trying to access, right? That is the basic idea behind this diagram. Now let us go over the flow. Now this is something which you might find relatable, because this is something which you easily observe, which involves sign in as well, right? So this is your web application. What you do is, for the first step, you render some kind of a login page to your browser, right? So whenever a user comes to your application, they see a login page. They may see a username and a password field, and they have to enter the details there, right? So this is the idea behind it. Now once you have provided the login page here, then the user will try to send some credentials, maybe username and password to you. Now what you do is, you send that information along with your client ID, right? So a client ID, of course, as we discussed before, is something which your web app has received from the authorization server, right? So this is something which the authorization server uses to verify that, okay, this is indeed your web app which is making this request and not somebody else, right? So what you do is, you send the client ID, you send a redirect URI. Now what exactly is a redirect URI? A redirect URI is something which tells the authorization server where to send the token, right? So this authorization server is responsible for sending you tokens, right? Tokens or any tickets by which you can easily access resources. So where should it send it, right? So it needs to have some kind of an address to send the token. So this redirect URI is that address. So when you're making the request for the token, you specify where you want to access that token to. This scope is something, when you're asking any permissions, is part of the scope, right? So what scope are you asking for? So for example, say I want to read user data, I want to read profile data, or maybe I want to write profile data. So all of these permissions are part of the scope. So I specifically ask the authorization server to provide me a token which has all of these scopes mentioned here, right? So any scope which is not mentioned here won't be a part of the token. So for example, let's just say I asked a scope for reading profile data, and maybe I want to now say write profile data, but I won't be allowed to do that, because every time I send my token, the token which I received from authorization server, to this resource, the resource will be able to verify that with the authorization server and check if I'm allowed to do that permission or not, right? So you specify whatever permission you want, you specify the redirect URI, and you specify who you are by the client ID to the authorization server, right? So once you've done that, the authorization server will check if the user is logged in or not, right? Because you are trying to access some kind of resource. So first, the server will check if you're logged in or not. And if you are logged in, it will send you that authorization prompt, right? So you see that prompt usually when you try to authorize any application, which says, say XYZ application is requesting access to do the following things, right? So authorization server will then ask you that, hey, this application is wanting to access these many scopes. Are you really willing to provide access to that scope or not? Correct? So what this web app does is, web app is just making a request on your behalf to the authorization server, and then authorization server comes to you to really verify, okay, indeed are you willing to send these many permissions to this web app or not? So when you do say, okay, I am allowing this web app to access those many scopes, in that case, when you provide the consent to the authorization server, then the server sends you an authorization code here, right? So authorization code is something like a token which you can then use to access the resource, right? But there are two steps here. So authorization code is something which you directly can't use to get the resource, but there's one additional step involved here, right? So this adds to the security. We'll discuss why this step is required, but for now, let's just recap. So you send the server this application, sent a login page to the browser. This user then entered his details here, and then this web app on behalf of the user asks the authorization server for some kind of a token to access the resource. Then the authorization first confirms with the user that it's indeed the same application which is using it, and then once the consent is received, it sends the authorization code here back to you. Right? This is the idea behind this process. And once the authorization code is there with you, in that case, the web application again takes the authorization code, sends it to the authorization server along with the client ID and client secret, and actually gets the access token now. Now, this access token is something which you ultimately are going to use the resource. So, the obvious question is, why do we need to have two codes which are coming in? Why not just use the authorization code directly and then access the token? Now, the answer lies in something which I already discussed before in the YouTube chat, is that if the authorization code is sent to the browser, anybody can easily intercept that, right? If something is being sent to the browser which is really sensitive, then anybody can easily look at all of the code in the browser, take your code out and use your resource as they want it, right? So this code is not really secure, right? So anything which gets sent to the browser is very vulnerable. You don't want that to happen. So what you do is, once you get the authorization code here, you use the authorization code in the back channel. So what the back channel here means is that you're using server side communication, right? So you are inside of your web application, the code for which is not publicly available, right? So this is a very secure code which is running on your backend, and then you use the authorization server and you make a very secure call to the authorization server to get the access token. Now the access token never reaches the front channel, right? So the access token is never exposed to any of the browser. So the browser doesn't have access to it. So even if somebody gets hold of the authorization code, he won't be able to do anything, because this doesn't allow in itself to get access to any resource. What you need is the access token. That is why, to add additional security, we have this two-way process. So first you get the authorization code, and then this web app again uses this authorization code to get an access token. And the access token in itself is what is used to access the resource, right? So this is a very complicated flow here. Don't worry if you have a lot of doubts in this case, feel free to ask me. But this is something which I always wanted to show you, how exactly in the backend everything works, right? So for you in the browser, all of these calls are not exactly visible to you, right? So you don't exactly see what is happening in the backend, what is the access token, how you actually are getting it. So all of that is handled by your backend application, right? This is the idea behind it. Now I'll go back to the YouTube chat to see if there are any questions here. Let's see. Okay. Will client ID can send many resources? Will client ID send many resources to owner? I'm not understanding this question properly. I'm not getting it. Please repeat this whole slide. Of course, I'll do that. Don't worry about it. Okay, client ID only for single user or all employees who are using. Yeah, so the client ID belongs to the application which you're using it, right? So it doesn't belong to any one specific user. Say, for example, we have this application, right? So GitHub is an application, Discord is an application, correct? So for example, if I'm allowing my Discord, if I'm allowing my GitHub application to be linked to my Discord, right? So in that case, this GitHub app which you're using has a client ID. The user doesn't need to have a client ID, because if you look at this flow here, the only thing you have to provide is your login credentials. You don't have to worry about the client ID, right? Client ID is part of the server. It is part of the backend here. correct? So this is something which the user doesn't need to worry about. So you can have just one client ID and you can send in as many users as you want, because this client ID corresponds to your application and not to one specific user. It is a part of the application code which runs and gets the code for you, right? So client ID is just that application. You don't have to have one client ID for every specific user here. That is the idea. Your client is browser or user. Yeah, so the client in itself is the browser and user, because you are using the browser here, right? So basically I'm using the same term for both of these things, right? So this is the web app and this is the browser. Browser in itself is the client and you are using this browser to access it. So it is just your part of it. This is the client entirely. Don't worry about it. Okay, Google is asking, when Instagram is talking to Twitter, will each user have separate client ID or just Instagram? Yeah, exactly. This Instagram will have that. So Instagram will have the client ID, right? And every user will just log in. It will just use that flow. And now when you log in, then Instagram application will use your login credentials and use its own client ID to tell the authorization server, to tell, say, me, Twitter, that okay, see, this is the user. This user has now it's this is the user and this user wants to access these many scopes, right? And now what the authorization server will do is it will get back to you. So it will actually ask you that first of all you log in and then you approve this request, right? So this is the flow which happens. So you don't easily get to it. So this web app doesn't have the password and username for this user, right? So this password and username for the user is safe with this browser. I never get access to any of the, say, username or password here, right? So what I do is I just make a request to the authorization server that okay, I want to have these many scopes and these many things. I need to be able to access these things. So what the authorization server does is it asks the user directly. Okay, first of all you log in and then you authorize this web app to access your application, right? So I don't give the username and password directly to the web app because that will again defeat the purpose, right? If you just give the username and password to the web app, I can do essentially anything. I don't even need to talk to the authorization server here. Correct? So you don't give the username and password. You just request some permissions from the authorization server, and then all the username and password verification happens between the authorization server and the browser. So this web app has no knowledge of what the username is, what the password is, how the authentication is happening. Like, all of that doesn't relate to any of this web app part. That is the idea. Okay. Seems this question. Will client ID send many resources to owner? This is something which I don't understand again. Sorry about that. Client ID only for single user or employees? Yeah, I think I've answered that question. Which is the best backend framework? Of course, this is not something we can discuss right now. Can I use Firebase as a backend over? Yeah, of course you can do that. Firebase is something which is a backend as a service. So you don't have to write the entire backend yourself. You don't have to code any of that. You usually get database. You usually get authentication, all of that right out of the box. Yeah, I'll repeat the flow. Don't worry about it. The authorization server generates 2 codes for a single request of resource. Exactly, yeah. So for every resource you request, it generates 2 codes. And why does that happen? I'll be covering that again. Don't worry about it. I'll cover that again. Yeah, is authentication code visible to the? Yeah, authorization code is visible to the user while using the browser. Yeah, I will show that. When we go to the practical implementation, don't worry about it. We'll be doing that really quickly. So when we go to the practical implementation, we'll be able to see all those codes in the browser as well. Right, so let's cover that now. So yeah, so we have covered these things. And now again, this is how it looks like, right? So when you look at the flow, this is how it appears. So you have some application, and this application requests these scopes from you, right? So whenever a web app application makes some request to the authorization server, the server sends you this prompt, the authorization prompt, that are you actually allowing this application to use these many things? Then you click on allow. So once the allow is pressed, at that point you get an authorization code, right? And then this authorization code is get used to get an access token. Now we'll be looking at this flow. Don't worry about it. We'll be doing a practical implementation of this flow really quickly. Okay, yeah. So this is how the code looks like. So whenever you have provided some consent, you get this in your website. So this will appear here in the browser, right? So you'll have code right in the browser, so anybody can access it. This is the authorization code. So this is not really sensitive because of course you can't access the resource directly from this code. You have to have the access token. So this is how the code appears here, right? Okay, perfect. So we have discussed this flow so far. Now let me just see why you should use this flow, right? So this is something. This flow is very common. This is used when you have a very user-facing application, right? So you have some kind of a backend, you have a web app, and you have a browser. In that case, you should go ahead and use this flow, implement this flow, correct? Now again, the same question which we asked earlier, why should we have two tokens instead of one? And this is only because of security, right? So you have a front channel, you have a back channel. So front channel is anything that is in contact with the browser, right? So whenever you communicate to and fro with the browser, that becomes a part of the front channel, right? So that is exposed, that is not very secure, right? So you don't have to send access tokens, very sensitive information to the front channel. You need to have all of that with the back channel. Back channel is the part which deals with the backend, right? So for example, if you have a backend application running and it contacts some authorization server, some other backend, right? So that is the back channel, because nobody has access to that, nobody can see the code from it, and that is the idea behind the back channel, front channel, correct? So now let us quickly jump into the activity part. Now I would like you to go to this website, which is OAuth 2.0 Playground, right? I want you to search for that OAuth Playground, and it looks something like this. And this is the what the website looks like. This is the OAuth Playground. So I wanted to quickly do that. I'll just search alongside, see. Yeah, so this is what the website looks like. OAuth.com/playground. Now this is where you'll finally be able to see the entire flow in action, and you'll actually understand much better now. Correct? So let's just I want you everybody to just go to the website for now. Right? Yeah, we won't be using any specific language. Don't worry about that. Yeah, I understand, like sometimes this happens, like this is a very complicated topic. Even when I do it personally, I get a lot of headaches and confusion, so it obviously won't be possible for you, you know, grasp it in the first go. But believe me, it is very important, and believe me, you'll have a very great edge if you understand this when you're building an application, right? So it does seem like a really hard topic, because it is one hard topic, right? Even for experienced developers, it is something which is really crucial, which is not very easy to master. Right? So don't worry about that. Even if it is going way above your head, just bear with me. We'll have sessions around. We'll have some playground. We'll have some activities which will make it somewhat clearer to you, right? So at least you have some idea of how authentication looks like. The difference between web and web browser. So web browser is your client. Basically, it is exposed to your client, and this web app lives on a backend. Right? So maybe you can host it on somewhere, or maybe you run it locally. So for example, if you have, say, VS Code running, right? In the VS Code, you have some server application. Let's just say a Node.js application running. So that is your web app, right? So what you are doing essentially is you're running a server on your, say, maybe your own system, and then you are rendering pages to the website, right? So maybe you're exposing your app at some port, and then you may be sending HTML pages to some browser, right? So the client interacts with the browser, but the backend is the web app, right? So these are the two different things, right? So what is a covered channel? A covered channel is a channel which is between, covered channel or a back channel is the same thing, and it is the channel which is between your backend, like for example the Node.js application running on your VS Code, between that and an authorization server. An authorization server is again some third-party servers hosted somewhere, like Google's server or some Microsoft server. So those are the authorization server. So when you make a connection from your backend, from your Node.js application to that third-party server, all of that communication is not visible on the browser, correct? So whenever I, as a client, am accessing any of the websites, I don't know what the backend is doing, right? What requests are the backend making? All I can see when I inspect element, or whenever I inspect the network here, is the application, all the communication which is happening within the browser, right? So I don't get to know what exactly the backend is doing. So that is a covered channel, right? So okay, let's get to the playground for now. Everybody here. Now, this is the playground where you can actually test out each and every OAuth flow, correct? So I want you to scroll down. Here you see there are multiple different flows here. We have only covered the authorization code flow here, because that in itself is a huge flow. And all of these different flows I won't be covering in this session for obvious reasons, right? So let's just click on the authorization code flow, correct? So now, what are the different steps in authorization code flow that we've discussed so far, right? So the first step should be this thing. Or yeah, maybe first of all, if you haven't registered your client, you'll get a prompt to register a client, right? So this is something which I already discussed. So the first time you're trying to access any of the resources, you have to register your client with the authorization server. So in that case, you get a client ID and a client secret, right? Because that is when the authorization server actually knows that, okay, this is you who's accessing the service. So I already did that before. So that is why I'm not getting the prompt of, registering my client. But if you're doing it for the first time, you'll be getting a prompt to register your client. So that is also very fairly easy step. Just click on register, and it will give you some kind of a credentials to keep safe, right? Let me know if you saw that thing is or not. Yeah, what is the capacity of servers to access login credentials? We'll talk about that later. So server capacity like often depends on what kind of server you're using. So very broad question that way. So let me know if you do see a register client option or not, right? That is something which is here, right? So first of all, let us now look at what the authorization flow is. So the first thing we have to cover is this. We have to send the list of scopes along with our client ID, along with the redirect URI to the authorization server, right? So what endpoint do we use for the server? Like where do you actually send the request, right? So that endpoint is the /authorize endpoint. So let's just say this is my authorization server. This is the authorization server, and this is the endpoint that I'm sending it, right? And what am I sending it? I'm sending my client ID. This is the client ID which actually identify that, okay, this is me who is accessing the service. This is my redirect URI, like where I'll get the code back. So I'll be getting the code back at this particular website again, right? So this is the redirect URI. What is the scope? Like what am I asking permissions for? I am asking permission for photo. We can ignore the offline access for now. So we are actually requesting permission to view photos, right? And state is something which is not really required now. We can ignore for now. You can research about it later, but we won't be covering that. It will just add to the confusion later on, right? So the only thing we are worrying about now is scope, redirect URI, and a client ID, right? And response type is code because we want a code to come back. This is again one of the very important fields here. So you need to keep these seed fields into mind, right? So you access these things. Now what I do is I click on authorize here, and now this is where this web application will be sending this request to the authorization server. Now the authorization server will ask you that, okay, are you indeed willing to give all of these permissions to this web app or not? And how does it do that? It will ask you to first log in and then click on yes or maybe allow the web application to do it. So let's just do that now. So what I'm doing is when I click on authorize, I am enabling the web application to request the authorization server, right? So now what happened is the web application requested the authorization server, and the authorization server has gotten back to me. It is asking me to first log in and then allow the application to use it, right? So if I don't remember my password, I can just click on forgot your password. It will just give me the username and password here. So I'll do is I'll first log in. So does this flow look familiar to you? Like it is the same flow which we use whenever we're trying to get access to any account, right? So that application made a request on my behalf, and now that authorization server is actually asking for my permission to do it, right? So I'll just enter my username, enter my password. Once I'm done with that, right, it will then ask me to first verify. Okay, well, maybe I think I put the wrong password here. Let me just do it again. Yeah, so there you go. This is not working. Yeah, see, so now it is actually asking me for permission that, see, this so and so application is trying to access your photos, right? So this is the scope that we listed already, right? So this is what it is asking the permission for. So I'll just say maybe I'll approve this request. So as a user, as an end user, you're sitting at the browser here, right? You're sitting at the browser, you're authenticating, you first authenticated, you provided your identity to the authorization server, and then you provide your consent to it, right? You said, okay, maybe I'm allowing this application to access these particular scopes from it, right? Now this request, this is something which you not saw, right? This is a request which was made in the back channel. This earlier request, right? What you do is now you approve this request, you provide consent to this flow. Now once you provide consent to this flow, now I want you to look at this URL here, right? So in this URL you can easily see what are the parameters here, right? So you see this is and code, and there you see the entire code here. So this is the authorization code. It is sent back to the browser, right? So this is completely insecure. Anybody can access this code from this browser. So once this code is here, maybe I can send it to anybody and they can use it. So this is now how it works, correct? So this is the authorization code which comes back. So this is clear, right? So you provide your consent, you get an authorization code back. Now what happens is this code is then used by this application to then send another request to the authorization server and get an access token later on, right? So when you do that, this is the part which comes next. It is saying that you have to exchange the authorization code, right? So what you do is now there's a different endpoint. Earlier there was the endpoint which you used was /authorize. Now there's another endpoint which is called /token, correct? So what you're doing now is this: you're sending another request to /token endpoint. You're providing your client ID, your client secret, and actually the code here. Now this request is not made through the browser. See, this request I'm not actually making through the browser. I'm just clicking on go here. Right? So when you click on go, this web app, the app which is in the backend, is going to make this post request along with these parameters, and this code is the same code which we got back in the this URL here, right? So when this backend applications makes this request to the authorization server, it will get an access token in return. right? This is the idea. So when I click on go here, yes, this is the access token I receive. So this is again not received in the browser, just for the sake of readability. This particular application displaying that, but usually this is not a part of the browser again. So you can see the browser URL here. There is no access token here, right? So you never get hold of any tokens at all. So this is the token which the web app gets back. So the web app will get back the access token, and it looks somewhat like this. So this is the access token. It's a used token, and it has some time in which it expires, right? So it is not infinite. It expires in some time, and there is a refresh token as well. So once your access token expires, you can use the refresh token to get a new token as well, right? And this is the scope which is allowed, correct? So this is the idea behind the authorization code flow. So is this something which is clear, or are there still any doubts about that? But this is the idea behind this authorization code flow. It's a somewhat complicated flow, but it's really important and really useful to follow, right? This is it. Now, like we'll go to simple things. Now this is pretty much you've cleared all of that, right? So don't worry about that. We won't be implementing all of that in code. So it's just for the sake of understanding that we're doing this. But when you're actually going to implement, will be a much simpler version. So you won't have to implement all of that. You don't have to worry about it. You're still, of course, allowed to do that, but the actual submissions that we're going to consider will be very simple applications of authorization authentication. All right. Now you are clear with OAuth, like what OAuth was, right? So that is the idea behind it. Now comes OpenID. So it's nothing new, nothing special, right? So what happens here is when you got the access token back, right? So this is the access token which you got back, correct? It has no information about the user, correct? So nowhere in this is mentioned my username or my password. So basically anybody can take this token, get whatever it wants, and the server has no idea who is going to access it, right? So it has no information about the user. So how do you solve that thing, correct? So the only way you solve that thing is in the scope part, you add this another scope which is called the OpenID scope, right? So basically what this does is OpenID scope along with the other scopes which you send, and then as a response you get an access token and an ID token. So you get an additional token from the server which is called the ID token, and then you can decode this ID token to get all the information about the user. So basically you get another field here which is called the ID token, and then you can access, say, the username, the user username, user image, and other attributes of the user directly through that token. That is the idea behind it. So that's all Connect actually is. So don't worry about any of that. It's very simple, just that, right? So now we'll quickly go to the JW2 tokens. Now, where does this tokens fit into the entire picture? Like we had so much of things going on. Where does the token come in? So if you look at these codes here, right? So this is where the token comes in actually. So any of the code exchange that happens, many of the services now use JWT tokens, right? So JWT stands for JSON Web Tokens, right? So it is somewhat this. So let me just go to this part, will be much clearer. So it's a very random string here, which is separated into 3 different parts, separated by dots, you can see, right? Somewhat similar to what the code is here, but it's not a JWT token here, but it is some kind of the same format. So you have 3 different parts in this token. So the first part is the header, which specifies what algorithm you're using, and it also identifies that it's a JWT token, first of all. The second part contains all the information here, right? So if the ID token wants to contain the name of the user or say some different properties, all of that will be part of the payload here. And the third part is signature. And so I won't be going into details about this because of course it'll get a lot complicated here. So I won't be covering any details here. It's all here inside. You can read it once you have notes. So don't worry about that. But I'll be just covering very basic idea of what JWT token is. So it is just a way, it's just one of the ways in which you can send access tokens, right? So this tokens which you already talked about. So this is the ticket which you have. So this is one of the formats in which you can send tickets, correct? So any of the flows which you look at, so any of the flows here, all of the flows will cover some token, right? So these tokens here, these tokens can be a say a JWT token. So this token itself is not a JWT token, but any token which you send can be a JWT token mostly. This is the idea. So these tokens are a way in which you can send information between 2 different servers and which can be decoded to get any of the values back, correct? So another activity for you guys here, I wanted to go to this particular website, which is JSON Web Tokens JWT.io, correct? So we'll just visit this website. I'll go over there myself. Now, this is where you can actually understand how it is being built, right? So maybe this is the part which says payload data, correct? Now what I can do is basically I can edit this field. Let's just say I add my own name here, right? So whatever changes I make here, you can see it is being reflected in this payload string here. So the middle string, the purple string, is changes every time I write something here, correct? So basically what I'm doing is I'm encoding all of this information as part of this particular string, correct? This is the idea behind it. So JWT token actually contains a lot of information which can be decoded and which can be consumed by people, correct? So whenever I share this token, I share it with some kind of a secret which I use, correct? So this is the secret which I basically use to share my token. So anybody who has this secret can then decode my JWT signature. That is the idea. So every time I say any part of the process which I have, for example, let's just go back to say one of the flows which we discussed earlier. So any flow here. So for example, if I get the token here, how does the resource know that this token is valid? Right. So it has to decode this token again. So for that, the resource, whatever resource manager there is, needs to have access to the secret key using which it decodes and checks if the token is valid or not. Right. So this is the idea behind that basically. Right. So the JWT token is pretty simple. You can play around with it here. You can maybe change the fields. You can add whatever secret key you want. So it can be any key you want, say key very secret or anything like that, right? So that is something you can play around with, and then you can create a token here. So this is the token which you created. Now anybody cannot decode the token without knowing your secret, right? So only somebody who knows the secret will be able to decode this entire token. So you can share this secret with say any clients or any of the resource owners, or there's another way you can do it, that is using two different secrets. So there are two secrets. One secret is a public secret and there's a private secret. So you sign it with some secret and then you give a public secret to everybody who wants to verify whether the token is right or not. There is something which you covered. All that is contained here. So I won't be covering it here because again it will get really confusing. But I've put that inside all of this documentation. So you can check this out all by yourself. Correct? Alright, so I'll just check if we have some kind of questions here. Or please repeat those 3 steps. What 3 steps are you talking about? Regarding what? Send me some more information on that. What's the purpose of doing that in OAuth? Purpose of doing what? I didn't understand the question that well here. Sorry. OAuth here. OAuth have credential for giving tokens, so OAuth can misuse from their credential. I'm not sure if I understand it right. Yeah, of course, if somebody gets access to your tokens, they can easily misuse them. That is why it is not part of the front end, right? So you never see an access token in the browser or anywhere in the code. You only get this access token inside your web app or whatever application you're running inside your node, say in the VS Code or in any other browser, any other code editor of your choice. This is only displayed here so that you understand how the flow looks like, but this is never a part of the browser. So you never get access to an access token. It is only a part of the web app which you're running. And only that will get access to it. So nobody can easily access the token as well. Right. So none of my API developer colleagues explain what APIs are, what OAuth is. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. I'm glad you understand it because it is indeed a very, very hard topic to master. That is something which I can attest to. But like once you have some idea, at least some start to understand how it works, then you can build up from there. You can research about it on your own, and if you're building this project, discussing this project, so once you start building the project, you'll have a lot more sense. It will make a lot more ideal to how to do it, and plus we'll be there over the weekend, the entire weekend on Discord. We'll be discussing there. I'll also host some voice channels there, so no problem there. 3 steps in the website playground. Okay, we'll go through that again towards the end of the session. Once I explain the project, we'll come back to that. Okay. All right. So where to store tokens? Again, yeah, this is a very nice question. So tokens are usually stored inside the web app. So for example, your backend application that has to somehow securely manage the tokens. So either you store it in some kind of a secrets database or say a secret vault, but that is something which you have to manage on your own, right? So that is your responsibility as a developer to see where the token is going to be stored, right? You can either use say HTTP only cookies, right? So those are cookies which are just read only, right? You can't access or modify them. So that is something you can use. Plus there are multiple other ways. So this is a really important question. So I will encourage you to search for it, like where exactly should you store access tokens and get really good resources. I've been through that myself, right? So that is something which will easily help you to understand better. All right. So let me first discuss the project here, like what the project will be basically working on the weekend, and then I'll get back to the questions again. Okay. So yeah, so we covered a lot of theory and we had activities. I'm not sure if they were really fun activities, honestly, but yeah, we did have activities on authorization, authentication. And now it's time for actual practical fun. And I really hope that it is fun for you guys to do it. Right. So this is the project that we're going to use. It's called Authentication in Node.js for a web app. I'll provide the links to you, which will be easily provided later on. but this is on hosted on Crio project, so you can easily search for that, or I'll also provide you a link. So basically, this application will be an end-to-end application and demonstrates how you can implement authentication in application using Node.js and JWT tokens, right? So basically, it just covers authentication and also covers how you use JWT tokens, right? So it's a very, very simple application, entirely simple, not much fancy, not any complicated flows around here. So you can just easily implement that. You can take all the knowledge that you have from here and then easily apply it on this particular example here, correct? So this is something you should take it. Now, you'll start with some basic knowledge of web apps again. Very basic knowledge, you don't have to have very huge knowledge. This module covers everything. So when you actually browse this particular website, in that case, you'll easily have all the prerequisites listed out. They will explain what web app is. Some references will be there to learn more about web apps. So don't worry about it. You can choose any language framework of your choice to get started. Don't worry about what language is mentioned in this particular. They're using Node.js, but you can easily use Python or any other language of your choice. Correct? You'll also get to implement a JWT solution all by yourself. Yay, finally. Right? So you'll get first-hand experience into what JWT is. And I'll be looking forward to all of your tokens on the Discord channel later on in the weekend. So we're looking at like what tokens you produce using this particular tool here. And where is the tool? I'm not sure yet. It's fun to play around with that. So you can easily send encrypted data to any of your friends and provide them with the key for them to access it, and then be able to easily securely send messages between people. And that is the perfect idea, right? So this is, you'll get an experience building JWT solution, and as an advanced and an optional step, right? Entirely advanced, entirely optional. If you want to do it, you can implement the authorization code flow in your application. Again, you don't have to write any code to do that. Like, very little code will be able to do it. You just have to use the right libraries for your application. For example, if you're using a Python app, you will also have different libraries which help you to develop OAuth application flows. So because since this is a very complicated flow, people usually don't code the entire flow themselves. They mostly use some libraries to help them. So I've been encouraging you to do that, but it's not entirely required, of course. It's a very complicated one. So once you're done with the very basic implementation, you can always check out the OAuth step, and you can try to add social logins. So maybe try to add Facebook login or Google login to your application and see how it works. Correct? So all of the submissions will have to be made to Authentication Web App. This is a repository. I also provide the links later on. Plus, you also have access to the entire Notion workspace. So all of that information inside the contribute.md file. Right, so that is basically it. And this is Discord channel. We'll be there over the entire weekend. We'll be discussing any questions, any doubts, because I'm pretty sure there'll be lots of doubts and lots of people who will be trying to understand it better. So do join a Discord server here. We'll be having maybe live sessions. You can do that anytime you want. You can easily personally reach out to me, ask me questions. I can send you some details about it as well. Don't worry about that. Yeah, it's time go time now. Let's just go back again to the stream to see if I have some questions to answer here. All right. 3 steps in the website playground. Okay, I will cover that again. Well, subjects you touched be covered in the Crio program. Yeah, these subjects won't be covered directly because there's some advanced subjects, but it will be covering a very basic idea of what JWT token is, how do you create JWT tokens, how you send those tokens. But that is the only thing that will be covered in this project, because I don't want people to be demotivated when they start out say a new project, right? Because if you start out with a very hard problem, right, that can easily make you never touch the topic again. Correct? So we started with a very simple idea. We started with a very simple JWT idea, and once you're comfortable building that, then you can leverage all that you learned today, right? You can leverage all the information that you got today, and then you can build the social login into your application. You can implement any of the authorization code flows into your application. So all of that is open to you, right? So you have the entire weekend. You have my support and the support of all the Discord community. You're free to do any of that work you want, right? Yeah, so how cookie settings developed by the owner, website developer? Yeah, the settings are controlled by the owner, of course. So whatever scopes you want to allow, so all of that can be easily managed by the owner itself, correct? OAuth help to protect the privacy between two applications, but who manage the OAuth? That OAuth doesn't use the nature of misuse. Exactly, yeah. So OAuth in itself is not an entity, right? So you have to understand OAuth is not some kind of an object or some kind of a service in itself. OAuth is just a recipe. It's just a specification. It is dictating how this entire process will be. So whatever you look at, so if you maybe imagine this, any of the flows, so all of this process, this is part of OAuth. OAuth isn't an entity. These are the players. These are the players which you have. You have a web app. You have an authentication server. You have a browser. There is no player called OAuth, right? So OAuth defines these steps. So this is the specification which OAuth provides. So OAuth in itself is just a format, right? It's not an entity. It's not an API. It's not some kind of a product. It's just guidelines which says, okay, this is how you should do it. Now you can easily implement entirety of it on your own, right? You can write everything of your own. You can write your own authentication server. You can write your own web app. So you can implement OAuth by yourself. That is not an issue, right? That is not something which you do. So maybe what you mean is, will the authorization server misuse your token or not? But that is not true, because authorization server is the one who's issuing the tokens, right? So that obviously that won't be able to misuse. This web app is something you are trusting the token with. Correct. So when you're getting a token to access the resource, this web is a trusted resource, right? So this is something which you trust to be able to keep the token secure. So this is the responsibility of the developer. For example, if you are writing this in your VS Code application, you have to make sure you store the token securely, that you don't share token with everybody else, and you only use token for when you're required to, right? That is the responsibility of the developer here. Correct. That is the idea. So you'll be developing this part. This is the work you'll be doing here. So the project which I mentioned, you'll be developing this web application, and then this web application will be powering some kind of a browser. Right? This is what you'll be powering. So this web application will run a browser, and this browser will perform all the kind of different steps. This will be your client. This will be your backend. This is what you'll be actually be building. So you'll have access to the token, and then you'll be responsible for storing the token in the best way possible. Okay, that is the idea. Can we get a Notion file? Of course, yeah. I'll be sharing a Notion file right after the stream. Don't worry about it. Discord link pinned. Yeah, of course. I'll share the Discord. It's also in my description. You can check that out for now. But I'll be sharing that right after the stream as well. Don't worry about it. It's also right up the stream. Okay, what's prerequisite for doing the project? There's no prerequisite at all. You don't have to know anything to start the project. Once you start it by yourself, you'll see a lot of references in the sections listed there. Plus, if you feel there's something which you don't understand, you can always reach out on Discord. You can always ask us questions, and we'll be very happy to help you out. Plus, you can also look at different websites and a lot of other resources which I'll be sharing later on. Don't worry about that. Feedback form for certification. I'm not sure what that means. Please explain one-time flow for browsing of any application. Okay, yeah. Let's just go back. Okay, so many of you are asking to repeat the website workflow. I'll do that again very fast. So first of all, as an overview, we should look at this particular step here. These 3 steps, right? Now, I want you to understand these steps along with this diagram here, right? So you have to relate these diagram with these steps here, right? So the first step was build the authorization URL and redirect the user to the authorization server, right? So what does this mean? So you have to look it from the point of view of a web app. Correct? So this is the web app that you're using, correct? Now the web app's first step should be what? The web app's first step should be to build the authorization URL. So this is the parameters of the authorization URL. So when you look at the first step, right? So let's just go back to the first step, maybe. Right? Let's go back to the first step. So this is where you're building the authorization URL, right? So you're specifying a client ID, a redirect URL, and a scope, right? So this is, you're constructing this now so that you want access to these things, right? You want access to photos, right? So you're building this URL, and then you're going to send this request to this particular server. This is the request that is being sent. Now, when you send this request to the authorization server, the authorization server will need to make sure that, okay, does the user actually allow this application to have these resources, right? Because it doesn't matter what you specify here in the scope. Only if I allow you to access my photos will you be able to access my photos, right? So this web application, the web application which I'm using, can make any number of scopes it wants, but it won't be of any use until I allow that use, right? Correct. So this is the first step. Where you build the URL, you send the request to the authorization server. This authorization server then comes back to the user. It comes to the browser to actually ask you to log in and authorize this web application. So this is what we saw earlier, right? So when you click on authorize, at that point you just see this is asking me to sign in right now. So this is the authorization server asking me to actually prove that, okay, this is me who is accessing it. And once I'm able to prove that, okay, this is me who is accessing the particular service, and then I'll be able to somehow authorize this web application to access the resources, right? So when I say, for example, I sign in again, let's just go the entire flow again. So I forgot my password again. Let's just see if I've copied it somewhere. Let's just see. Yep, there it is. Correct. So once I provide the password again, so now again, yeah, I have to approve the request here. So once I approve the request to allow the photos, now I come to the next step, right? So this is how it works. So this is when I get the authorization code back. Look at the browser here, you'll have the authorization code right up in the browser again. So this is the code, right? This is how it works. So once you have the code, once the web app has the code, it can then internally make a request to the authorization server again, right? So it can then go back to the server and tell that, okay, see, I have gotten the permission from the user I have gotten this authorization code. This authorization code essentially means that the user has allowed this web application to actually get an access token. That is what it means, right? So once the web app has authorization code, it can then get back to the authorization server without the need for your interaction. Now you no longer need to interact. You have allowed the web application to do its part. Now all the subsequent steps will be completed by the web app itself. So you don't have to participate anymore, right? So the next steps, these two steps are part of the web app, and it happens in the back end. It doesn't happen in the front end. So no longer will be asked to sign in or authorize anybody else, right? So I can just click on it matches and go. So all of that happens in the back end. I don't have to worry about it, and I get this access token back. Right? This is the idea. So all these flows happen in the back end, and the ones in the burgundy. Now these happen in the back end, and then I get the access token, and then the web can easily access any resource it wants. Basically, that is the idea behind. I think the flow is not clear. Thank you for giving good explanation on it. Of course, no issues. Say when login to enter, we get prompt sign in with Google. Doesn't mean that Google have implemented their own auth flow. Exactly. Yes, that is true. That is true. They haven't implemented the flow. They have implemented the authorization code flow. So this is the code flow. This is the specification. They've just implemented their own version of it. That is all. I'm glad you get it. Who provides client ID to web app? Authorized server. Exactly. Yes. So what you have to do is when you first click on the playground, you might have gotten a prompt to register your client, right? So basically that is what you do. So you first register your client before any of this can begin, right? So before any of this flow starts, the first step is the web app being registered with the authorization server. So once the registration step is complete, at that point you get this client ID, which you then later on go on to use, right? So that is the ultimate first step. So first of all, no random application can obviously make request to authorization server, right? You need to first register. Okay, this is something which you trust. You have access to the authorization server. You have to register your application there. I showed you the page, right? I showed you the Max.Azure page, right? So this is Max.Azure authentication server. It can easily be accessed. It's called Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, correct? So this is the Microsoft's authorization server, and here I'm registering my own application with it. So I'm basically providing a name. I'm providing who can access this API. I'm providing redirect URI, like what is the redirect URI of my application, like where is my app living, right? So basically I'm providing that detail. I'm just registering here. So once I register this thing, I'll get a client ID and client secret for my app, which I can then later on use for my applications. That is the idea. What does API policies contribute in the API journey? I'm not sure what this means, honestly. How does Google be monetized to their own auth? Any thoughts? They're not monetizing their flows per se because there's nothing to monetize from here, right? So maybe you can think of let me drink some water. Sorry, just a sec. Yeah, so basically there's nothing to monetize in this case. So if you take an example of say weather API, so in that case it does make sense to monetize because you are providing a service, right, which is not free, right? So basically only those guys with the API key will be able to access it. But in the case of Google and Facebook, those are not really something you can monetize here, if you understand it right. So this is a very common flow. For example, if you have any application, you provide Google sign-in option to your users. Do you charge users for that? No, right? You just allow that as a convenience thing. So whenever you're using any new service, that service doesn't charge you for having a Google sign-in option, correct? That is the idea. We see authorized message in the browser too. So is it at auth code stage or token generation stage? So are you talking about this message? So this message is only visible now because this web app is explicitly serving you this. So it's only for demonstration purposes, right? So ultimately this is never visible to you. Just because this is a playground and just because it wants you to understand the flow, is it actually showing you this code. The only code which you actually see is the authorization code up here. So we got this code here, right? This is the only code which you actually see. This code stays in the backend. It never is visible in the public. So the authorization can be by the owner or the website developer. So the authorization, this server, if you're talking about the server, in that case, the server is mostly owned by the owner, or you can also use third-party servers. For example, I showed you the Microsoft server, right? So you can create your own Microsoft server as well. So that is how you can easily. So you don't have to write the entire code yourself. So the token endpoints. You don't have to expose them yourself. You don't have to have the /authorize endpoint / token endpoint. So none of that needs to be handled by yourself. All that will be handled itself by the Azure service itself. So yeah, don't have to work on the authorization server by yourself. I want to make project on website design. Then which language should I choose for backend? So again, for the language, it can be any language of your choice, honestly. So that really doesn't depend on what language you want to choose. So if you're comfortable coding in some particular language, go for it. If you're comfortable writing in some other language, you can easily take that as well. So basically, there's no hard and fast rule for that. Yeah, I will provide documentation for that. No issues. I will share in this entire Notion page as well. Anyway, let me see if I can get my video back up. Just to say fare thee well again, maybe. Yeah. Anyways, let's see. Let's go back. Yeah. Maybe later some later time. Anyways, yeah. So what it says, then you're authorized which message what is this? Your authorized message which the user gets. We see authorized message in the browser too. Oh yeah, that is the authorization code stage, of course. So we get that okay, you have authorized such and such application. That is the authorization stage. So that message usually happens when you have completed this. So once you have given a consent to the authorization server, in that case you get a code back, and this web app gets a permission. Okay, this gets a message that okay, you have now allowed this web app to get an access token on your behalf. That is when you get that message, of course. Yeah, basically that I think that covers all of that. If you have any more questions, I'll be here for like 5 more minutes, and then we'll wrap this all up. All right, so I'll just try to see if I can get my video back up right on time. Maybe not. It's always some kind of a trouble with the Wi-Fi's. Yeah. In what case the refresh token will be used? Yeah, so when you looked at the access token field, you always saw that there is some kind of expiry on that, right? So it is not valid for the entire duration. It's only valid for some duration of time, right? So once that duration is expired, so once the access token is no longer of any use, in that case is when you actually start to use the refresh token, correct? So when you use the refresh token in that scenario to actually get a new access token, basically. That is the idea. So I hope I'm visible now again. Anyways, whatever. Yeah. That is the idea. So once the access token expires, in that case, you can easily use the refresh token to get a new access token. That is the idea behind the refresh token here. So I think the flow is now clear somewhat, and it is complicated. I understand. Plus, I'll encourage you to read the entire thing. So I've done it in a very short format. So all of that data which is here is very easy to read, very easy to understand, and it has only that amount of information which is required, not much, not less, right? So you can easily read all of that, understand, play around with these activities, do participate in the activity again by yourself, understand how the flow works, and of course make sure to at least try out the project. It's really simple. You should get started with that, honestly. And this is the idea. And even if you have if any of your friends who got intimidated by any of this experience, do encourage them to get back to it, because of course it does sound a lot intimidating when you look at it first, but believe me, it's very important. If you understand this, it adds a lot of value to your resume when you write, say, authentication authorization, because this is something which is not very easy to accomplish. So anybody can build a web app, anybody can build a simple application, but adding, say, a social login or say Google login, Facebook login, that requires some extra steps that you need to know, and it's very like industry ready skill as well. So once you know these skills, you can easily build any applications for the industry, right? So that is one of the very common ideas here. So make sure you have a good understanding of that. All right. Attendance for certificate purpose. Yeah, all of that can be easily handled in the Discord server, I guess. So if you're part of the Discord server, we can figure something out. When a web app is asking for certain scope, how does authorized server get to know the user detail so that it can reach out to the user and get the scope? Exactly. So this is where the redirect URI comes into the picture, right? So if you remember code flow here, so you see this is the URI which I provide, right? So this redirect URI tells the authorized server where to go to ask for the user's consent, correct? So this redirect URI will tell where my client actually is. So when you send this request to the authorized server sends the prompt to this redirect URI, and that is how the prompt reaches you. And then you log in, then you authorize, all of that happens later on. So the redirect URI is really crucial in that sense. If you provide a wrong redirect URI, you will never get past this step. That's a good question. I hope you now understand that. All right, this is there. Send the link. What link are you talking of? Jayesh, it's a built-in session. Yeah, that's some kind of a trade-off that you always need to keep in mind. Like, if you're covering a very hard topic in a very short time, you'll have to see if it's we have to cover just the right amount of details for that. And I'm glad that you like it, honestly. Yeah, I'll be sharing the links, no issues. Make sure to just join a Discord, because that is one place where I can easily access all of you guys. Because once you end the stream, there's no way to actually get back to you, honestly, apart from the email path. But yeah, do make sure to join Discord. I'll be sending all the links, or maybe I'll just send the links here. Don't worry about it. Just give me a sec. I'll share the Notion later on, because I'll have to add some permissions as well. That is a part of it. I have to set permissions. I'll have to, all that process will have to happen here. So why not we do that right now? Let's just see if I can do that on the stream, and then we can always have a new experience here. So when I'm doing a share, I can either add specific people or I can share to web, right? So anybody with a link can access it. So I'll just turn this on, right? So when I turn this on, okay, there's a lot of noise in the background. Please ignore that. So now I can add permissions here. So I can either allow editing, I can either allow comments, I can either allow duplicate as template, right? So these are the permissions that I'm specifying here. So I'll allow comments. I won't allow editing, because otherwise it gets really messy in that sense. I'll allow duplicate as template. So if you want to duplicate this entire thing to your own Notion, you can easily do that as well. Right, so this is what I've done. And now I'll just copy this link. So this is the token which I'm now copying here. So this token is copied. Now I'll be sending you all this token here. So once you have this token, let me know if you can access these things. And also let me know what permissions you have when you access this thing. Right, so this is the idea behind it. All right, now you have the Notion link. What else do you need? You maybe need the Discord link. Yeah. So yeah. That is something which was right up, but yeah, maybe my laptop won't be able to handle that many things here altogether. Yeah, I think I might have freezed it again. Yeah, no issues. Exactly. Yeah, this is the only idea behind the session, was to have some kind of an idea, and then you can build upon it on your own. You can maybe do some more research, and I'll be happy to know your research on Discord channel. Like, do communicate there. We'll keep it active. We'll be there with the entire weekend. Do share what you learned. Do share your resources. What helped you learn better? Like any new ideas that you have, any new examples that you can share with the community to understand this better. Because once you have understood this thing, you can easily teach to a lot of other people as well. It really gives you a lot of edge there. So do make sure. Happy that people got this thing. Yeah, the Notion is here. Feel free to make templates of this, and ping me on Discord. Like we'll be there. I think in the description you do have the link, right? Let me know if you can find the link in the description. If it's not there, I'll just post it again here. Let me see. Let me just get the. Hi guys. Also, do make sure to introduce yourself here. I'll be happy to look at any of your introductions here. So yeah. Let me see. What are the links here? Links, server settings. Yeah. Invites. What is the invite here? This is the invite. This is the code which never expires. All right. Yeah. So this is the Discord ID which you can use to access the server. Send me a hi there. Can you see that who has access to that link you shared now? Not exactly, because see, with authorization you don't have access to authentication, correct? So for that to happen, you need to have some OpenID as well. So what I've done is I've just authorized that to happen. I've never actually know who exactly is accessing the resource. But if for example, when you remember sometimes when you share a link to somebody, it is required for you to sign in to access it, right? So even if you share the link, right? So even if you let me just go back to the Google example, right? So if I go back to the Google example, look at, okay, this is not the whole example. Where is the whole example? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Terminology. I guess a terminology. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So here you can see it says anyone with the link can access or view, right? So you can change it to somebody who has logged into the Google account. So once that is done, then I'll be able to access, then I'll be able to see who is actually accessing the link. Because once you have the link, it won't be sufficient in itself. So after you get the link, you also have to sign in. So you also have to authenticate. So once you authenticate, you actually are providing your information, your user details to the server. And once you provide your details, and at that point, I'll be able to see who exactly is accessing all of my Notion pages. I don't know Slack. Yeah, we don't have a Slack workspace for the Crio workshop because honestly, there is no specific reason, but I thought Discord would be nice because I already used Discord before and I love the concept of voice channels and all of that here. So yeah, no issues. Like if you have some specific things that if you like about Slack, let me know. Maybe we can bring that up later on. But yeah, for now, I think this is enough. This is going to work fine. All right, so I think that is all from my side. I'll just pause for a minute there. It's almost 9 p.m. It's time for dinner. And let me know if you have any questions. And again, even after the session, you can always reach out to me on Discord. And I encourage you to let me know if you need any kind of channels, any extra channels that you want. Because we just have very limited channels here. So if you want any more channels, you can easily have that. And we can easily ask questions on the channels here. You're welcome to do that. Let me just check this part here. Yeah, you already asked this question there, so no issues. All right, so this is basically it. Yeah, I would love to have some kind of a short introduction from people here instead of just the highs. So it just add some more context. Yeah, maybe just give more claims to your authentication than just a simple hi. All right, anyways. All right, I think yeah, that's just pretty much it. I think we'll close the stream now. Shishti, is that fine? Should we close the stream? 7 certificate, can you provide this? Of course. Like, yeah, reach out on Discord and see what we can do about that. Can you do hi on Discord? Did you send me a message? I'm not sure. Anyways. All right. So let's just go ahead and close the stream for now. And thank you guys for watching. I'll be looking at all of your submissions. Make sure you attend the project at least and provide some kind of, some kind of feedback, some kind of, you should have something by the end of the weekend and we will be happy to look and review that. That's all. Perfect. No, you don't need to register on any website. Just open the link. It will be available to you, right? And also the recording will be there on YouTube channel, so you can easily view it later as well. So no issues there. Perfect. Goodbye, guys. Had a great time. Bye-bye.